You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear a man inquiring in a tourist centre about activities suitable for families. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hi, can I help you?
I'd like to find out if you have any excursions suitable for families.
Sure. How about taking your family for a cruise? We have a steamship that takes passengers out several times a day. It's over 100 years old.
That sounds interesting. How long is the trip?
About an hour and a half. And don't forget to take pictures of the mountains. They're all around you when you're on the boat and they look fantastic.
Okay. And I assume there's a cafe or something on board?
Sure. How old are your children?
My daughter's 15 and my son's 7.
Right. Well, there are various things you can do once you've crossed the lake to make a day of it. One thing that's very popular is a visit to the country farm. You're met off the boat by the farmer and he'll take you to the holding pens where the sheep are kept. Children love feeding them.
My son would love that. He really likes animals.
Well, there's also a 40-minute trek round the farm on a horse if he wants.
Do you think he'd manage it? He hasn't done that before.
Sure. It's suitable for complete beginners.
Good.
And again, visitors are welcome to explore the farm on their own, as long as they take care to close gates and so on. There are some very beautiful gardens along the side of the lake which also belong to the farm. They'll be just at their best now. You could easily spend an hour or 2 there.
Okay, well, that all sounds good. And can we get lunch there?
You can, and it's very good, though it's not included in the basic cost. You pay when you get there.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
So, is there anything else to do over on that side of the lake?
Well, what you can do is take a bike over on the ship and then go on a cycling trip. There's a trail there called the Back Road. You could easily spend 3 or 4 hours exploring it, and the scenery's wonderful. They'll give you a map when you get your ticket for the cruise. There's no extra charge.
What's the trail like in terms of difficulty?
Quite challenging in places. It wouldn't be suitable for your 7-year-old. It needs someone who's got a bit more experience.
Well, my daughter loves cycling, and so do I, so maybe the 2 of us could go, and my wife and son could stay on the farm. That might work out quite well. But we don't have bikes here. Is there somewhere we could rent them?
Yes, there's a place here in the city. It's called Ratcheson's.
I'll just make a note of that. How do you spell it?
RATCHESONS. It's just by the cruise ship terminal.
Okay.
You'd also need to pick up a repair kit for the bike from there to take along with you, and you'd need to take along a snack and some water. It'd be best to get those in the city.
Fine. That shouldn't be a problem. And I assume I can rent a helmet from the bike place.
Sure, you should definitely get that. It's a great ride, but you want to be well prepared because it's very remote. You won't see any shops round there or anywhere to stay, so you need to get back in time for the last boat.
Yeah. So what sort of prices are we looking at here?
Let's see. That'd be 1 adult and 1 child for the cruise with farm tour. That's $117, and an adult and a child for the cruise only, so that's $214 altogether. Oh, wait a minute. How old did you say your daughter was?
15.
Then I'm afraid it's $267 because she has to pay the adult fare, which is $75, instead of the child fare, which is $22. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So how do we find out?
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen to questions 11 to 14.
OK everyone, thanks for coming today and for your interest in volunteering abroad. For those that don't know much about our company, Time Abroad, let me start by telling you a bit more. Time Abroad is one of the largest volunteer abroad organisations in the UK. The company was founded in 2000. In 2007, the company grew by joining with another company, PT Travel, making us even larger. In 2014, we sent 10,000 people abroad on a variety of service projects and internships overseas, more than any other company. All participants receive the best support from our full-time professional staff to ensure that the experience is safe, worthwhile, and fun. We have lots of very experienced staff working for us. We have around 150 full-time staff members, many of whom are former volunteers themselves, inspired by their own experience. Some of these people are even part of the original groups of volunteers back in the early 90s. About 75 of those staff are not located in the UK at all, and spend their whole time in another country supporting the volunteers. They are experts on the local communities you are working in, having spent their whole lives there. They have vast experience in fields such as community development or education. The times that volunteers join the programme vary a lot. Some join in July because they have just finished studying at college or university and want to do some volunteering before they move on to work or further study. The winter months are also popular because people want to escape the cold weather in the UK. But there are no set start dates, and programmes run continuously throughout the year, so the majority of volunteers start when it is best for them. Time Abroad is an entirely independent organisation, which does not receive any funding from religious bodies, political parties, development organisations, or other sources. And of course, we don't request money from our partner organisations in the developing world. All our work is 100% funded through your contributions as a volunteer. We do get help from the government, but that is from reduced business taxes, not financial contributions. It is this financial independence that gives us the freedom to set up projects wherever we think it may be useful and where we think that our volunteers can make a valuable contribution.
Before you listen to the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen to questions 15 to 20.
Now I'm going to tell you about some of the more popular opportunities in a bit more detail. One of the most popular volunteering choices is teaching. You'll find a warm welcome awaits you from our students around the world. The main thing you will do is assisting with English conversation, because although the local teachers are very capable of teaching the structural aspects of the English language, such as the grammar, they do not use the correct intonation or pronunciation, because they lack the confidence of a native speaker. By providing conversational English teaching, you can greatly enhance the learning experience of thousands of children and adults with whom we work in the developing world. You can also volunteer in agriculture and farming. Access to safe and healthy food is a major concern of any society. Volunteers work on a farm with the aim of promoting sustainable local food sources and responsible farming. Using pesticides and other destructive agricultural techniques can have a long-term negative impact on the environment and threaten the future well-being of whole regions. Time Abroad's agricultural and farming projects focus on organic farming practices and educating local communities on their benefits. You could also volunteer in the field of veterinary medicine. If you do this, you will be working alongside a vet in a local veterinary practice. You will help the vet when people bring in sick animals or join the vet on visits to people's houses or other places. You will gain fantastic insight that would not be possible in your own country. You are likely to see many exciting types of animals, like snakes, big cats, or even elephants. And you will develop a better understanding of the problems people are faced with in both urban and rural areas of the Third World. So, I hope that's helped you to learn a bit more about time abroad. Does anybody have any questions?
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear two students called Trudy and Stuart, who are both studying to be librarians, discussing a paper that they are going to write together. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 23. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 23.
OK, Stuart, we need to start planning our paper on public libraries. Have you thought of an angle yet?
Well, there's so much we could look into. How libraries have changed over the centuries, for instance, or how different countries organise them. What do you think, Trudy?
Maybe we should concentrate on this country and try and relate the changes in libraries to external developments, like the fact that far more people can read than a century ago, and that the local population may speak lots of different languages.
We could include something about changes in the source of funding too.
Yes, but remember we're only supposed to write a short paper, so it's probably best if we don't go into funding in any detail.
Right. Well, shall we just brainstorm a few ideas to get started?
OK. We obviously need to look at the impact of new technology, particularly the internet. Now that lots of books have been digitalised, people can access them from their own computers at home.
And if everyone did that, libraries would be obsolete.
Yes.
But the digitalised books that are available online for free are mostly out of copyright, aren't they? And copyright in this country lasts for 70 years after the author dies. So you won't find the latest bestseller or up-to-date information.
That's an important point. Anyway, I find it hard to concentrate when I'm reading a long text on a screen. I'd much rather read a physical book. And it takes longer to read on a screen.
Oh, I prefer it. I suppose it's just a personal preference.
I expect the libraries will go on evolving in the next few years. Some have already become centres where community activities take place, like local clubs meeting there. I think that'll become even more common.
I'd like to think so. And that they'll still be serving their traditional function, but I'm not so sure. There are financial implications after all. What I'm afraid will happen is that books and magazines will all disappear and there'll just be rows and rows of computers. They won't look anything like the libraries we're used to.
Well, we'll see.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 24 to 30.
I've just had an idea. Why don't we make an in-depth study of our local public library as background to our paper?
Yes, that'd be interesting. And raise all sorts of issues. Let's make a list of possible things we could ask about, then work out some sort of structure. For instance, we could interview some of the staff and find out whether the library has its own budget or if that's controlled by the local council.
And what their policies are. I know they don't allow food, but I'd love to find out what types of noise they ban. There always seems to be a lot of talking, but never music. I don't know if that's a policy or it just happens.
I've often wondered. Then there are things like how the library is affected by employment laws. I suppose there are rules about working hours, facilities for staff and so on.
Right. Then there are other issues relating to the design of the building and how customers use it, like what measures does the library take to ensure their safety? They'd need floor coverings that aren't slippery, and emergency exits, for instance. Oh, and another thing, there's the question of the kind of insurance the library needs to have, in case anyone gets injured.
Yes, that's something else to find out. You know something I've often wondered?
What's that?
Well, you know they've got an archive of local newspapers going back years. Well, next to it, they've got the diary of a well-known politician from the late 19th century. I wonder why it's there. Do you know what his connection was with this area?
No idea. Let's add it to our list of things to find out. Oh, I've just thought, you know, people might ask in the library about local organisations like sports clubs. Well, I wonder if they keep a database or whether they just look online.
Right. I quite fancy finding out what the differences are between a library that's open to the public and one that's part of a museum, for example. They must be very different.
Then something else I'd like to know is...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You are going to hear a lecture about the history of Indian railways. First, you now have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In today's lecture, we're going to be talking about the history of Indian railways, from when they began up until 1945, when they had all been taken over by the government. Indian Railways is an Indian state-owned enterprise, owned and operated by the Government of India through the Ministry of Railways. It is one of the world's largest railway networks, comprising 115,000 kilometers of track, over a route of 65,000 kilometers, and there are 7,500 stations. It transports over 25 million passengers daily, which is over 9 billion on an annual basis. Indian Railways is the world's 9th largest commercial or utility employer by number of employees, with over 1.4 million employees. The history of rail transport in India began in the mid-19th century. The core of the pressure for building railways in India came from London. In 1848, there was not a single kilometre of railway line in India. A British engineer, Robert Maitland Brereton, was responsible for the expansion of the railways from 1857 onwards. The Allahabad-Jabalpur branch line of the East Indian Railway had been opened in June 1867. Brereton was responsible for linking this with the Great Indian Peninsula Railway, resulting in a combined network of 6,400 kilometers. Hence it became possible to travel directly from Bombay to Calcutta. This route was officially opened on the 7th of March in 1870, and it was part of the inspiration for French writer Jules Verne's book Around the World in 80 Days. At the opening ceremony, the Viceroy Lord Mayo concluded that if possible, at the earliest possible moment, the whole country should be covered with a network of lines in a uniform system. By 1875, about £95 million were invested by British companies in Indian Railways. By 1880, the network had a route mileage of about 14,500 kilometers, mostly radiating inwards from the 3 major port cities of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. By 1895, India had started building its own locomotives, and in 1896 sent engineers and locomotives to help build the Uganda railways. In 1900, the Great Indian Peninsula Railway became a government-owned company. The network spread to the modern-day states of Assam, Rajasthan, and Andhra Pradesh, and soon various autonomous kingdoms began to have their own rail systems. In 1905, an early railway board was constituted, but the powers were formally vested under Lord Curzon, the then Viceroy of India. It served under the Department of Commerce and Industry, and had a government railway official serving as chairman, a railway manager from England, and an agent of one of the company railways as the other 2 members. For the first time in its history, the railways began to make a profit. In 1907, almost all the rail companies were taken over by the government. The following year, the first electric locomotive made its appearance, and with the arrival of World War I, the railways were used to meet the needs of the British outside India, but with the end of the war, the railways were in a state of disrepair and collapse. In 1920, with the network having expanded to 61,220 kilometers, a need for central management was mooted by Sir William Ackworth, a British railway economist. Based on the East India Railway Committee chaired by Ackworth, the government took over the management of the railways and detached the finances of the railways from the other government revenues. The period between 1920 and 1929 was a period of economic boom. There were 66,000 kilometers of railway lines serving the country. The railways represented a capital value of some 687 million sterling, and they carried over 620 million passengers and approximately 90 million tons of goods each year. Following the Great Depression, the railways suffered economically for the next 8 years, and the Second World War severely crippled the railways. Starting in 1939, about 40% of the rolling stock, including locomotives and coaches, was taken to the Middle East. The railway workshops were converted to ammunitions workshops, and many railway tracks were dismantled to help the Allies in the war. By 1946, all rail systems had been taken over by the government.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.